The dusty streets of North Platte, Nebraska held their breath every time Deanna Olsen stepped onto the wooden sidewalk, and not a single man in town could claim he hadn't thought about asking for her hand at least once during the scorching summer of 1883. Deanna lived with her uncle, Judge Theodore Olsen, in the finest house on Locust Street, a sprawling two-story structure with a wraparound porch and lace curtains that billowed in the prairie wind. The judge had taken her in when she was 15, after her parents succumbed to typhoid fever during their journey west from Pennsylvania. Now 21 years old, Deanna had blossomed into a woman who turned heads not merely because of her striking beauty, with her auburn hair and emerald eyes, but because of the intelligence that sparkled in her gaze and the confidence in her bearing that suggested she would never settle for anything less than extraordinary. The problem, as every eligible bachelor in North Platte would attest, was that Deanna Olsen refused every suitor who came calling. The banker's son had presented her with imported chocolates from Chicago, only to be politely but firmly declined. The owner of the general store's eldest boy had offered to name his future establishment after her, and she had thanked him with a smile that somehow made the rejection sting even more. Even Marcus Thornton, whose father owned half the cattle ranches within 50 miles, had been turned away despite arriving with a bouquet of roses that must have cost him a small fortune to acquire in this dusty railroad town. Judge Olsen watched his niece's refusals with a mixture of pride and concern. He understood her reluctance to accept just any proposal, having raised her to value education and independence in an era when women were expected to be little more than ornamental additions to a man's household. But he also worried about her future, about what would happen when he was gone and she was left to navigate the world alone. "You cannot refuse every man who asks to court you," he told her one evening as they sat on the porch, watching the sun paint the Nebraska sky in shades of orange and pink. "Eventually, you will need to consider practicalities." Deanna set down her book, a volume of poetry she had ordered from an Eastern publisher. "Uncle Theodore, I appreciate your concern, but I refuse to marry simply for practicality. When I marry, it will be because I have found someone who sees me as more than a pretty face or a connection to the most powerful man in town. I want someone who understands that I have thoughts and dreams beyond managing a household." The judge sighed, recognizing the stubborn set of her jaw that reminded him so much of his late brother, Deanna's father. "I only want you to be happy, my dear, but happiness and practicality need not be mutually exclusive." "Perhaps not," Deanna agreed, returning her attention to her book. "But I will know the difference when I see it." The town's annual harvest dance was scheduled for the first Saturday in September, and the entire community buzzed with anticipation. The event would be held in the newly constructed town hall, a source of civic pride that boasted gas lighting and a polished wooden floor perfect for dancing. Every unmarried woman within 20 miles would attend, and the unmarried men would see it as their annual opportunity to make impressions and perhaps secure courtship agreements. Deanna had attended the previous 2 harvest dances and had spent most of both evenings declining dance partners, or, when cornered by her uncle's insistence on politeness, enduring awkward waltzes with young men who spoke only of cattle prices or railroad expansion. She had considered skipping this year's event entirely, but her uncle had looked so hopeful when he mentioned it that she could not bring herself to disappoint him. The morning of the dance, Deanna stood in her bedroom as her friend Clara, the dressmaker's daughter, helped her into an emerald gown that matched her eyes. The dress had arrived from Omaha just 2 days prior, and its elegant cut and fine fabric made Deanna feel almost guilty about her lack of enthusiasm for the evening ahead. "You look absolutely stunning," Clara breathed, adjusting the bustle. "Every man at that dance will fall over himself trying to catch your attention." "That is precisely what I am afraid of," Deanna replied, studying her reflection in the full-length mirror. Another evening of refusing the same conversations and the same presumptions about what a woman should want from life. Clara, who had recently become engaged to the blacksmith's apprentice, shook her head fondly. "You are impossibly particular, Deanna. Most women in this town would consider themselves blessed to have the options you reject so casually." "I know," Deanna said softly, feeling a pang of guilt. "I do not mean to seem ungrateful for my circumstances. I simply cannot bring myself to accept a future that feels like a cage, even if it is a gilded one." The town hall glowed like a lantern in the darkness when Deanna arrived with her uncle shortly after 7 o'clock. Music spilled out into the street, a lively tune played by a traveling band that had stopped in North Platte for a few days. Inside, the hall had been decorated with garlands of late summer flowers and ribbons, and tables laden with food lined one wall while the center of the room had been cleared for dancing. Deanna had barely removed her shawl when Marcus Thornton appeared at her elbow, his hair slicked back with what must have been half a tin of pomade. "Miss Olsen, you look radiant this evening. Might I have the honor of the first dance?" "I am afraid I need a moment to catch my breath after the walk here," Deanna said, deploying the excuse she had prepared in advance. "Perhaps later in the evening." Marcus's face fell, but he nodded and retreated, already scanning the room for his next opportunity. Deanna felt her uncle's gentle hand on her arm. "One dance would not kill you," Judge Olsen said quietly. "No, but it would give him hope where none exists," Deanna replied. "That seems crueler than an honest refusal." The evening proceeded much as Deanna had anticipated. She danced twice, both times at her uncle's gentle insistence, with respectable young men who spoke of weather and crops, and could not quite meet her eyes when she asked them about their thoughts on the territorial expansion, or the railroad's impact on indigenous populations. Between dances, she retreated to the refreshment table or stood with Clara, who seemed to genuinely enjoy the festivities in a way Deanna envied but could not emulate. It was nearly 9 o'clock, and Diana was contemplating how early she could reasonably convince her uncle to leave, when the doors to the town hall opened and a figure stepped inside who immediately drew her attention. He was tall and lean, with the sun-weathered look of a man who spent his days in the saddle rather than behind a desk. His clothes were dusty from travel, his boots worn but well-maintained, and his hat was the broad-brimmed style favored by cowboys who worked the open range. Unlike most of the men in the hall, who had dressed in their finest suits despite the heat, this man looked like he had ridden straight from the trail to the dance without bothering to change. His face was handsome in a rugged way, with sharp cheekbones and eyes that seemed to take in everything at once. Diana watched as he moved to the side of the room, seemingly content to observe rather than participate. He accepted a cup of punch from one of the ladies serving refreshments and leaned against the wall, his gaze moving across the dancers with an expression that suggested mild amusement. "Who is that?" Deanna asked Clara, nodding toward the newcomer. Clara followed her gaze and frowned slightly. "I have no idea. I have never seen him before. Perhaps he works for one of the ranches outside town." Deanna found herself unable to look away from the stranger. There was something about the way he carried himself, a quiet confidence that did not demand attention but nevertheless commanded it, that intrigued her. He seemed utterly comfortable in his own skin, unbothered by the fact that he was underdressed for the occasion or that he knew no one in the room. She was still watching him when his eyes suddenly met hers across the crowded hall. For a long moment, they simply looked at each other, and Diana felt a strange flutter in her chest that she could not quite explain. Then the stranger smiled, just a slight upturn of his lips, and pushed away from the wall. He was walking toward her. Diana felt her heart begin to race as he crossed the room, his stride unhurried but purposeful. Around her, she was vaguely aware of conversation stopping, of heads turning to watch this dusty cowboy approaching the judge's niece. But all of her attention was focused on the man now standing directly in front of her. Up close, she could see that his eyes were a striking gray-blue, like storm clouds over the prairie, and that a small scar cut through his left eyebrow. He smelled of leather and sage, and something else she could not quite identify, something that made her think of wide open spaces and freedom. "Evening, miss," he said, and his voice was low and rough, like gravel under wagon wheels. "I know I am not dressed proper for this kind of affair, and I apologize for that. But I have been on the trail for 3 weeks straight, and I heard music when I rode into town, and I thought to myself that it would be a shame to miss the chance to dance." He paused, and that slight smile returned. "Would you do me the honor of one dance?" Diana was aware of the silence that had fallen around them, of every eye in the hall watching to see how the judge's particular niece would respond to this presumptuous cowboy. She knew she should refuse, that accepting would only encourage more unwanted attention, that dancing with a dusty stranger who had not even bothered to clean up before approaching her would be seen as either an act of charity or a significant breach of propriety. But there was something in his eyes, a directness and honesty that none of the other men who had asked her to dance possessed. He was not asking because of her uncle's position or because she was considered a prize to be won. He was asking simply because he wanted to dance with her, and he seemed utterly unconcerned with whether she said yes or no. "Yes," Diana heard herself say. "I would like that." A ripple of surprise moved through the crowd as the cowboy extended his hand and Diana placed hers in it. His palm was calloused and warm, his grip gentle but secure as he led her onto the dance floor. The band, sensing something significant was happening, began to play a waltz. The cowboy placed his hand on her waist with a respectfulness that Diana appreciated, maintaining a proper distance even as he guided her into the first steps of the dance. For a man who had spent weeks on the trail, he moved with surprising grace, leading her through the waltz with an ease that suggested he was no stranger to dancing. "I am Ryder Lawson," he said as they turned across the floor. "I work for the Running W Ranch about 30 miles north of here." "Diana Olsen," she replied, though she suspected he already knew who she was. "You ride all the way from the Running W just for a dance?" Ryder's smile widened slightly. "Not exactly. I am here to deliver some papers to Judge Olsen regarding a property dispute. The dance is just a fortunate coincidence. You have business with my uncle, your uncle." Ryder looked genuinely surprised, and Diana found herself believing that he truly had not known who she was when he asked her to dance. "I suppose I should have introduced myself to him first then. I hope I have not caused you any embarrassment." "On the contrary," Diana said, and realized she was smiling. "This is the first honest conversation I have had at one of these dances in 3 years." They continued to dance, and Diana found herself relaxing in a way she had not expected. Ryder did not pepper her with questions about her favorite foods or attempt to impress her with tales of his accomplishments. Instead, he seemed content to simply dance, occasionally offering a quiet observation about the music or the interesting way the gaslights cast shadows on the walls. "You dance very well for a cowboy," Deanna said after a while. "My mother insisted all her children learn," Ryder replied. "She said that a person who could not dance was missing out on one of life's simple pleasures. I have 5 sisters, so I had plenty of practice partners growing up." 5 sisters, Deanna laughed. "That must have been quite a household." "It was never boring," Ryder agreed. "Though it meant I learned early on that women are every bit as capable and intelligent as men, and anyone who thinks otherwise is a fool. My sisters could outride, outshoot, and outthink most of the men in our town, and they made sure I never forgot it." Deanna felt her smile widen. "I think I would have liked your sisters." "They would have liked you too," Ryder said, and there was a warmth in his voice that made Deanna's heart skip. "They always appreciated a woman who knew her own worth." The waltz ended too soon, and Deanna found herself reluctant to step out of Ryder's arms. Around them, other couples were leaving the floor, but she and Ryder stood still for a moment, neither quite ready to break the connection. "Thank you for the dance, Miss Olsen," Ryder said finally, releasing her hand with what seemed like reluctance. "It was the highlight of my evening and possibly of my entire 3 weeks on the trail." "Thank you for asking," Deanna replied. "You are the first person in a very long time to make me enjoy one of these events." Something flickered in Ryder's eyes, a question or perhaps a hope, but before he could speak, Judge Olsen appeared at Deanna's side. "Deanna, I believe Mr. Thornton has been waiting for that dance you promised him," the judge said, though his eyes were fixed on Ryder with an expression of curiosity. "I promised nothing," Deanna said, but she could see her uncle's expression and knew he was concerned about appearances. "But if you insist, I suppose one more dance will not hurt." She turned back to Ryder, who was watching the exchange with interest. "It was a pleasure to meet you, Mr. Lawson." "The pleasure was mine, Miss Olsen." Ryder tipped his hat to her, and then to the judge before stepping away, melting back into the crowd with the same quiet confidence with which he had arrived. Deanna allowed herself to be led back onto the dance floor by Marcus Thornton, but her mind was elsewhere. She could still feel the warmth of Ryder's hand on her waist, could still hear the rough timbre of his voice, and she found herself scanning the crowd for another glimpse of him. Marcus was speaking about his father's plans to expand their cattle operations, but Deanna barely heard a word. Her attention was entirely focused on trying to find Ryder in the crowd, but the cowboy seemed to have disappeared. Perhaps he had left, she thought with a pang of disappointment. Perhaps that one dance had been all he wanted, and she would never see him again. The thought bothered her far more than it should have. The dance with Marcus finally ended, and Deanna excused herself, citing a headache that was not entirely fabricated. The evening had suddenly lost all its appeal, and she wanted nothing more than to go home and think about the strange cowboy who had appeared out of nowhere and made her feel something she had not expected. She found her uncle speaking with several other prominent men from town and waited patiently until there was a pause in the conversation. "Uncle Theodore, I am not feeling well. Would you mind terribly if we left?" The judge looked at her with concern. "Of course not, my dear." "Let me fetch your shawl." They made their way out of the town hall into the cool evening air. The stars were brilliant overhead, undimmed by city lights, and Deanna paused for a moment to look up at them. "That was an interesting choice of dance partner," Judge Olsen said as they began walking toward home. Deanna felt her cheeks warm. "He was different from the others." "That is certainly true." The judge was quiet for a moment. "Did you know who he was?" "Ryder Lawson." Deanna looked at her uncle in surprise. "You know him?" "Of him," the judge corrected. "He has quite a reputation in these parts. He is the foreman at the Running W Ranch, one of the most successful operations in the territory." They say he has a gift with horses and that he is absolutely honest in all his dealings, which is rare enough in this business. But he is also known for being a bit of a loner. He keeps to himself, does his work, and does not involve himself in town politics or social affairs. He mentioned he had papers for you regarding a property dispute. Ah, yes, the judge nodded. There has been some confusion about boundary lines between the running W and a neighboring property. Mr. Lawson has been gathering survey documents and witness statements to help resolve the matter. From what I understand, he is quite thorough. They reached the house, and the judge unlocked the door, holding it open for Deanna. I hope you are not setting your hopes on that particular young man, my dear. From what I hear, he is not the marrying type. Married to his work, they say. Deanna did not respond, but as she climbed the stairs to her room, she found herself thinking that perhaps the reason Ryder Lawson had not married was simply that he had not yet found someone worth marrying. It was a thought that kept her awake long into the night, staring at the ceiling and remembering the feel of his hand in hers. The next morning was Sunday, and Diana accompanied her uncle to church as usual. The sermon was about the virtue of patience, which Diana found somewhat ironic given that her own patience was being tested by her inability to stop thinking about a cowboy she had met for all of 15 minutes. After the service, she stood with her uncle on the church steps, exchanging pleasantries with the other congregants. She was discussing the upcoming charity bazaar with Clara when she caught sight of a familiar figure standing near the hitching posts. Ryder Lawson had cleaned up since the previous evening. He wore a pressed shirt and clean trousers, and his hat was in his hands as he spoke to someone Deanna could not see. But there was no mistaking him, and Deanna felt her heart leap in her chest. As if sensing her gaze, Ryder looked up, and his eyes met hers across the churchyard. For a moment, neither of them moved. Then Ryder said something to his companion and began walking toward the church steps. Deanna was acutely aware of the curious looks from the other church-goers as Ryder approached. It was unusual for a ranch foreman to attend services in town when he worked so far away, and his presence was drawing attention. "Good morning, Miss Olsen," Ryder said when he reached her. "Judge Olsen." "I hope I am not interrupting." "Not at all, Mr. Lawson," the judge replied, his tone neutral but his eyes sharp with interest. "I was not aware you attended services here." "I do not, usually," Ryder admitted. "But I am in town for a few days while the ranch owner conducts some business, and I thought it would be appropriate to pay my respects." He paused, then reached into his jacket and withdrew a leather folder. "I also wanted to deliver these documents to you, sir." The survey maps and statements regarding the boundary dispute. Judge Olsen accepted the folder. "I appreciate your diligence, Mr. Lawson. Perhaps you would care to discuss the matter over dinner this evening, say 6 o'clock. Deanna tried not to show her surprise. Her uncle rarely invited business associates to dine at their home, preferring to keep his professional and personal lives separate. Ryder hesitated, glancing at Deanna as if seeking her approval. "I would not want to impose on your Sunday evening." "It is no imposition," the judge assured him. "Besides, it will give Deanna someone new to talk to. She has grown quite tired of my old stories." There was a twinkle in the judge's eye that made Deanna suspect her uncle was not being entirely altruistic in his invitation. "In that case, I would be honored," Ryder said. "Thank you, Judge Olsen." "Excellent. We will see you at 6 then." The judge tipped his hat and began walking toward their home, leaving Deanna alone with Ryder for a brief moment. "I hope you do not mind my accepting," Ryder said quietly. "Your uncle is quite persuasive." "I do not mind at all," Deanna replied, and found she meant it more than she could safely express. "I look forward to continuing our conversation from last night." "As do I," Ryder said, and the warmth in his eyes made Diana's breath catch. "Until this evening, then, Miss Olsen." He settled his hat back on his head and walked away, leaving Diana standing on the church steps with a smile she could not quite suppress. The hours until dinner seemed to crawl by with agonizing slowness. Diana helped their housekeeper, Mrs. Patterson, prepare the meal, an activity that usually soothed her but today only made her more anxious. She changed her dress 3 times before finally settling on a simple but elegant blue gown that she hoped looked appropriate for a Sunday dinner without seeming like she was trying too hard to impress. At precisely 6 o'clock, there was a knock at the door. Diana was in the parlor with her uncle when Mrs. Patterson showed Ryder in. The cowboy had changed into what were clearly his best clothes, a dark suit that, while not as fine as what the town's wealthier men wore, fit him well and emphasized his lean, strong frame. "Mr. Lawson, welcome," Judge Olsen said, rising to shake Ryder's hand. "Please have a seat. Diana, would you pour our guests some tea?" Dinner was a surprisingly pleasant affair. Diana had worried that the conversation might be stilted or awkward, but Ryder proved to be an engaging guest. He spoke knowledgeably about the cattle industry and the changes the railroad was bringing to the territory. But he also listened attentively when Diana or her uncle spoke, asking thoughtful questions and showing genuine interest in their perspectives. "I understand you have quite a reputation as a horseman," Judge Olsen said as they finished the main course. "Diana has always been fond of horses herself." Diana shot her uncle a look, recognizing his matchmaking attempt, but Ryder simply nodded. "Horses are honest creatures. They do not care about your social standing or how much money you have. They only care whether you treat them with respect and understanding." "I would love to hear more about your work with them," Diana said, seizing the opportunity. "I have always thought horses were among the most noble of animals." Ryder's face lit up in a way it had not before, and for the next 20 minutes, he spoke about the horses at the Running W, about breaking and training them using patience rather than force, about the individual personalities each animal possessed. Diana listened, fascinated not only by what he was saying but by the passion in his voice, the gentleness in his eyes when he described working with a particularly skittish mare. After dinner, Judge Olsen suggested they take their coffee on the porch, and Diana found herself sitting in the evening air with Ryder while her uncle excused himself to review some documents, a transparent attempt to give them time alone. "Your uncle is not subtle," Ryder observed with a smile once the judge had gone inside. Diana laughed. "No, he is not. I hope you do not feel you are being manipulated." "Not at all," Ryder said, "though I confess I am curious about something. Last night, several people mentioned that you have refused every suitor in town, yet you agreed to dance with me. Why?" Diana considered the question, wanting to be honest. "Because you were different. The other men who have asked to court me, they see me as the judge's niece, as a prize that would elevate their social standing or connect them to power. You did not even know who I was when you asked me to dance. You just saw me as a person, and you asked because you wanted to, not because you thought you should or because it would benefit you somehow." Ryder was quiet for a moment, his gaze fixed on the darkening horizon. "I grew up watching my father try to control my mother, try to mold her into his idea of what a wife should be. It made them both miserable. My mother only found happiness after he died, and she could finally live life on her own terms. I swore I would never treat a woman that way, that I would only want to be with someone who chose me freely, not because society expected it or because she had no other options." "Is that why you have never married?" Diana asked softly. "Partly," Ryder admitted. Also, because I have never met anyone I could imagine spending my life with, anyone who made me want to give up the freedom of the open range for the stability of a home and family. He turned to look at her, and Deanna saw something in his eyes that made her heart race. Until now, perhaps. Deanna felt heat rise to her cheeks. We have only just met. I know, Ryder said. And I am not suggesting anything improper, but I would very much like to get to know you better if you would allow it. I will be in town for another week while my employer conducts his business. Would you permit me to call on you? Deanna knew she should be cautious, should not let herself be swept up by the romantic notion of a dusty cowboy who had appeared out of nowhere. But there was something about Ryder that felt right, that felt like the answer to a question she had not known she was asking. Yes, she said, I would like that very much. And so began a week that Deanna would remember for the rest of her life. Ryder called on her every day, sometimes for brief afternoon visits, sometimes for longer evenings spent talking on the porch or walking through the town. He told her about his life on the ranch, about the satisfaction of hard work and the beauty of watching the sun rise over the prairie. She told him about her parents, about her love of reading and learning, about her frustration with a world that seemed to have such limited expectations for women. They discovered they shared a love of poetry, though Ryder's education had been limited, and he had learned most of what he knew from his schoolteacher sister. Deanna lent him books from her uncle's extensive library, and they spent hours discussing them, debating interpretations and favorite passages. On the Wednesday of that week, Ryder arrived with a surprise. I have my employer's permission to take one of the ranch horses out for the day, he said. I thought perhaps you might like to go riding if your uncle approves. Deanna had practically run to find her uncle, who gave his permission with a knowing smile. She changed into her riding habit, a practical divided skirt that scandalized some of the more conservative women in town, but which allowed her to ride astride rather than side saddle. Ryder's eyes widened when he saw her outfit, but his expression was one of approval rather than shock. You continue to surprise me, Miss Olsen. Deanna, she corrected. I think we have moved past such formality. Deanna, he repeated, and she loved the way her name sounded in his rough voice. And you must call me Ryder. They rode out of town into the open prairie, and Deanna felt a freedom she had not experienced in years. Ryder had brought a gentle bay mare for her, a horse with soft eyes and a smooth gait, and they rode for miles, talking and laughing, and simply enjoying the vast expanse of land around them. They stopped beside a creek to let the horses drink and rest, and Ryder helped Deanna dismount, his hands lingering on her waist just a moment longer than necessary. This is what I love most about this life, he said, gesturing to the endless prairie. The space, the freedom. Sometimes in town, I feel like I am suffocating, like there are too many rules and expectations closing in on me. I understand that feeling, Deanna said. Though for me, it is not the physical space that feels confining. It is the expectations about who I should be and what I should want. Everyone assumes that because I am a woman, I should want nothing more than to marry and have children and keep house. And while those things might be part of what I want someday, they are not all I want. I want to matter, to make a difference, to use my mind and my education for something beyond managing servants and planning dinner parties. Ryder looked at her with an intensity that made her breath catch. Anyone who cannot see that you are extraordinary is a fool. You have a brilliant mind and a kind heart, and you deserve to have a life that honors both. They were standing very close now, close enough that Deanna could see the flecks of silver in his blue-gray eyes. For a moment, she thought he might kiss her, and she found herself hoping he would. But Ryder stepped back, respecting the boundaries of propriety even here, miles from town where no one would see. "We should head back," he said, his voice rougher than usual. "Your uncle will worry." The ride back to town was quieter, both of them lost in their own thoughts. When they reached the judge's house, Ryder helped Deanna dismount, and this time his hands definitely lingered on her waist. "Thank you for today," Deanna said. "It was perfect." "It was," Ryder agreed. "Deanna, I need to tell you something. My employer's business will be concluded by the end of the week. I will need to return to the ranch." Deanna felt her heart sink. "Oh, but I do not want this to end," Ryder continued quickly. "I have never felt about anyone the way I feel about you. This past week has been the happiest of my life, and the thought of leaving and never seeing you again is unbearable." "Then do not leave," Deanna said, then realized how that sounded. "I mean, I understand you must return to your work, but surely you could visit when you have time off." "The ranch is 30 miles away," Ryder said. "That is a full day's ride each way. I could perhaps visit once a month, maybe less during the busy seasons." He paused, seeming to struggle with something. "Deanna, I know this is fast, probably too fast. We have known each other less than a week. But I also know that I have never been more certain of anything in my life. I am falling in love with you, and I think you might feel the same way about me." Diana's breath caught. It was too fast, too soon, too improbable, but it was also true. Against all logic and propriety, she had fallen for this dusty cowboy who saw her as a complete person rather than a prize to be won. "I do," she admitted. "I feel the same way." Ryder's face lit up with a smile that transformed his usually serious features. "Then I am going to speak to your uncle tonight if he will see me. Deanna, I do not have much to offer you. I am just a ranch foreman, and I will likely never be wealthy. But I can promise to treat you as an equal partner, to support your dreams as well as my own, and to love you with everything I have for as long as I live. Will you consider marrying me?" Deanna felt tears spring to her eyes, but they were tears of joy. "Yes," she said. "Yes, I will marry you." Ryder let out a laugh of pure happiness and swept her into his arms, spinning her around before setting her gently back on her feet. "I will make you happy," he promised. "I swear it." That evening, Ryder formally asked Judge Olsen for permission to marry Deanna. The judge, who had been watching their courtship with a mixture of concern and approval, asked Ryder a series of pointed questions about his prospects, his plans for the future, and his understanding of what Deanna needed in a partner. Ryder answered each question honestly and thoughtfully. Yes, his income was modest but stable. Yes, he understood that Deanna was educated and intelligent, and would need more than domestic duties to occupy her mind. Yes, he was prepared to support her in whatever pursuits made her happy, whether that meant continuing her education, involving herself in community affairs, or pursuing interests that were traditionally considered masculine. Finally, the judge sat back in his chair and studied Ryder for a long moment. "You are not what I envisioned for Deanna," he said. "I had always imagined she would marry someone with education and refinement, someone who moved in the same social circles we do." Deanna, who was sitting beside Ryder, felt her heart sink, but then her uncle smiled. "However, I have watched you with her this week, and I have seen something I never saw with any of the other young men who courted her. I have seen joy. Deanna has been happy in a way I have not witnessed since before her parents died. And that, Mr. Lawson, is worth more than all the education and refinement in the world. You have my blessing." The wedding was planned for early November, giving Deanna time to prepare her trousseau and for Ryder to make arrangements at the ranch. The intervening weeks were a blur of activity. Ryder returned to the Running W to explain the situation to his employer and to prepare the small house on the ranch property where he lived. It was far from grand. He warned Diana, just 3 rooms and a kitchen, but it was sturdy and well maintained, and he would do everything he could to make it comfortable for her. Diana spent her time sewing and planning, but also reading everything she could find about cattle ranching and ranch management. If she was going to be a rancher's wife, she wanted to be a useful one. Mrs. Patterson taught her practical skills like bread making and preserving, things Diana had never needed to learn when living in her uncle's house with hired help. Ryder rode to North Platte twice during those weeks, staying at the boarding house and spending his days with Diana. They talked about their future, about their hopes and dreams, about the life they would build together. Ryder spoke of his ambition to one day own his own ranch, a small operation where he could raise horses. Diana talked about her dream of starting a school, something that would give children in the rural areas access to education. "We will find a way to make both happen," Ryder promised. "It may take years, but we will work toward it together." The wedding took place on a crisp November morning in the same church where they had met again after the dance. The ceremony was simple but lovely, with Clara as Diana's maid of honor and Ryder's friend Tom, another ranch hand from the running W, standing up as his best man. Judge Olsen walked Diana down the aisle, tears shining in his eyes as he placed her hand in Ryder's. Diana wore a cream-colored dress she had sewn herself, with lace at the collar and cuffs, and she carried a bouquet of the last autumn wildflowers. Ryder wore a new suit, the first he had ever owned, and he looked at Diana as if she were the most precious thing in the world. "I, Ryder, take you, Diana, to be my wife," he said when the time came for vows, his voice steady and strong. "I promise to honor you, to respect you, to support you in all your endeavors, and to love you with my whole heart for all the days of my life. I, Diana, take you, Ryder, to be my husband," Diana replied, her own voice thick with emotion. "I promise to stand beside you, to be your partner in all things, to support your dreams, and to love you without reservation for as long as we both shall live." When the minister pronounced them husband and wife, Ryder kissed her gently, and Diana felt a sense of rightness settle over her, a certainty that this was exactly where she was meant to be. The reception was held at Judge Olsen's house, and half the town attended. Even Marcus Thornton came, gracious in his defeat, and wished them both well. The food was plentiful, the music lively, and Diana danced with her new husband until her feet ached, and still she did not want to stop. As the sun began to set, Ryder and Diana said their goodbyes and climbed into the wagon that would take them to the running W. Judge Olsen embraced Diana tightly, whispering that she would always have a home with him if she needed it, though he suspected she would not. Diana promised to write often and to visit when she could. The journey to the ranch took several hours, and darkness had fallen by the time they arrived. Ryder had arranged for them to stay the first night in the main ranch house as guests of the owner, but the next morning he led Diana to the small house that would be their home. It was, as he had warned, modest. But it was also clean and well kept, and Diana could see that Ryder had made an effort to prepare it for her. There were new curtains on the windows, clearly purchased in town, and a vase of dried flowers on the table. The furniture was simple but sturdy, much of it handmade, and there was a cozy feeling to the space that made Diana immediately feel welcome. "It is not much," Ryder said, watching her anxiously, "but we can make improvements over time." "It is perfect," Diana said, and meant it. "It is ours, and that makes it perfect." Life on the ranch was different from anything Diana had experienced before. She woke each morning before dawn when Ryder rose to tend to his duties, and she spent her days learning the rhythms of ranch life. She helped where she could, cooking meals, tending a small garden, and learning to care for the chickens they kept. But she also continued her reading and began writing letters to various educational organizations, inquiring about the possibility of starting a small school for the ranch family's children. Ryder's work was demanding, often requiring him to be in the saddle from dawn until dusk, but he always made time for Deanna. In the evenings, they would sit together on the small porch of their house, talking about their days, making plans for the future, and simply enjoying each other's company. On Sundays, their only day of rest, they would ride out onto the prairie together, exploring the vast landscape and reveling in their freedom. The other ranch hands and their families were welcoming, and Deanna quickly made friends among the ranch wives. They taught her practical skills and shared their knowledge about surviving in this harsh but beautiful land. Deanna, in turn, offered to teach their children to read and write, and soon she was holding informal lessons 3 afternoons a week in the bunkhouse. The first winter was hard. Deanna had never experienced the brutal cold of a prairie winter, the way the wind could cut through even the thickest coat, the challenge of keeping warm when fuel was scarce. But Ryder was there, keeping the fire going, ensuring they had enough supplies and holding her close through the long, dark nights. "Are you sorry you married me?" he asked one particularly bitter evening as they huddled together under layers of quilts. "Sorry you left your comfortable life in town for this." Deanna looked at him in surprise. "Not for a single moment. Are you sorry you married a woman who had never cooked a meal or milked a cow before coming here?" "Never," Ryder said fiercely. "You are the best thing that ever happened to me, Ryder Lawson." "And you are the best thing that ever happened to me," Deanna replied, kissing him softly. Spring brought relief from the cold and a new vitality to the ranch. The cattle were moved to higher pastures, and Ryder was often gone for days at a time, riding the range and checking on the herds. Deanna missed him terribly during these absences, but she kept herself busy with her teaching and with helping some of the other ranch wives with their spring planting. It was during one of Ryder's longer absences that Deanna realized she was pregnant. The signs were unmistakable, though she had not been expecting them so soon. She debated waiting until Ryder returned to tell him, but when he finally rode in one warm May evening, dusty and exhausted, the news burst out of her before she could stop it. "I am going to have a baby," she announced as soon as he walked through the door. Ryder froze, and for a moment Deanna worried that he was not pleased. But then a grin spread across his face, and he swept her into his arms, spinning her around just as he had the day he proposed. "We are going to have a baby," he repeated, his voice filled with wonder. "Deanna, that is the most wonderful news. Are you feeling well? Should you be standing? Should I fetch the doctor?" Deanna laughed at his sudden protectiveness. "I am fine. Women have babies all the time. I am not fragile." "I know," Ryder said. "But you are precious to me, and I want to take care of you." The pregnancy was relatively easy, though the summer heat made Deanna uncomfortable, and she tired more easily than usual. Ryder was attentive to the point of being overprotective, constantly worrying about her welfare and insisting she rest more than she thought necessary. But Deanna appreciated his concern, touched by how seriously he took his impending fatherhood. Judge Olsen visited twice during those months, riding out from North Platte with gifts and supplies. He seemed pleased with how his niece had adapted to ranch life and impressed by the small school she had established. "You have found your place," he told her during his second visit when Deanna's pregnancy was obvious. "I was worried that you might regret your choice, that the harsh realities of this life might dim your happiness, but I can see that you are thriving." "I am happy, Uncle," Deanna assured him. "Happier than I ever imagined I could be. Ryder is everything I hoped for in a partner and more." Their son was born in early January during a brief warm spell between winter storms. The birth was attended by the ranch owner's wife, a practical woman who had delivered most of the babies born on the ranch in the past 20 years, and by one of the other ranch wives who had become Diana's closest friend. The labor was long and difficult, and there were moments when Diana wondered if she would survive. But Ryder was there, holding her hand, wiping her brow and telling her over and over that she was strong, that she could do this, that he loved her. When their son finally arrived, red-faced and screaming, Diana felt a love unlike anything she had ever experienced. Ryder cried when he held his son for the first time, tears streaming down his weathered face as he looked at the tiny life they had created together. They named him Robert, after Diana's father, and he had his mother's green eyes and his father's dark hair. Ryder was a devoted father from the first moment, getting up in the night to bring Robert to Diana for feeding, changing diapers without complaint, and spending every free moment holding and playing with his son. "I want to be the kind of father mine never was," Ryder told Diana one night as they watched Robert sleep in his cradle. "I want him to grow up knowing he is loved, that he matters, that he can be whoever he wants to be." "He will know," Diana assured him. "How could he not with a father like you?" The years that followed were full of both challenges and joys. Diana continued teaching, now with Robert on her hip or playing nearby. The small school grew as word spread, and eventually the ranch owner donated a building specifically for the purpose, a small one-room schoolhouse that became Diana's pride and joy. Ryder worked tirelessly, not only fulfilling his duties as foreman, but also saving every penny he could spare toward his dream of owning land. His reputation as a horseman grew, and people from neighboring ranches began bringing him their most difficult animals to train. The extra income was modest but meaningful, bringing them closer to their goal. When Robert was 3, Diana became pregnant again. This time, the pregnancy was harder, and Diana was sick for much of it. Ryder worried constantly, but Diana remained optimistic, certain that everything would be well. Their daughter was born in the autumn, and they named her Elizabeth, after Ryder's mother. She had her father's gray-blue eyes and a head of auburn hair that matched Diana's. Where Robert had been a quiet, serious baby, Elizabeth was all smiles and laughter from the beginning, bringing new light into their little house. "We are blessed," Diana said one evening as she nursed Elizabeth while watching Ryder read to Robert from one of the books Diana had brought from her uncle's library. "I know our life is not easy, that we do not have wealth or luxury, but we have something more valuable. We have love and purpose in each other." "We do," Ryder agreed, setting the book aside and pulling Diana and Elizabeth close, Robert climbing into his lap. "And I would not trade it for anything in the world." Judge Olsen's health began to fail when Robert was 5 and Elizabeth was 2. Diana made the journey to North Platte as often as she could, bringing the children to visit their great-uncle. The judge delighted in his young relatives, and seeing Diana's happiness and the family she had built seemed to give him peace. He passed away quietly one spring evening with Diana holding his hand. She grieved deeply for the man who had given her a home when she had lost everything, who had raised her with love and wisdom, who had supported her choice to marry for love rather than practicality. To Diana's surprise, Judge Olsen had left her his house and a significant sum of money in his will. The inheritance was substantial, more than Diana had imagined, and it meant that she and Ryder could finally purchase land of their own. They bought a section of land not far from the running W, good grazing land with water access, and enough space to build both a house and facilities for the horse ranch Ryder had always dreamed of. The ranch owner, who had become a good friend over the years, was sad to lose his foreman but happy to see Ryder achieve his goal. Building the ranch was a family effort. Deanna worked alongside Ryder, helping where she could while also caring for the children and continuing to teach at the school. The first year was exhausting, but by the time Robert turned 7, they had a modest but functional operation. Ryder's reputation brought in clients, and the horse ranch began to turn a profit. The house they built was larger than their first home, but still modest by the standards of some of the grand ranches in the territory. But it had something their first house had not: a room specifically designated as a study, where Deanna could read and write and manage the ranch's accounts. Ryder had insisted on it, wanting Deanna to have a space of her own just as he had his workshop and stables. Deanna expanded her teaching, and eventually, with the support of several neighboring ranches, a proper school was built halfway between their ranch and the running W. Deanna served as its first teacher and administrator, creating a curriculum that emphasized not just the basics of reading and arithmetic, but also critical thinking and the natural sciences. The school served children from 6 ranches, and Deanna was proud of the education she was able to provide. When Robert was 10 and Elizabeth was 7, Deanna found herself pregnant once more, a surprise given her age. She was 35, and this pregnancy was the hardest yet. But Ryder was there every step of the way, taking on extra duties around the ranch and ensuring Deanna rested as much as possible. Their second son was born in the winter, healthy and strong despite Deanna's difficult pregnancy. They named him Theodore, after Judge Olsen, and he had a perfect blend of both parents' features: Ryder's strong jaw and Deanna's green eyes and auburn hair. "Our family is complete," Deanna said as she held Theodore, surrounded by Ryder, Robert, and Elizabeth. "This is everything I ever wanted but did not know to hope for." The years continued to pass, bringing both challenges and rewards. There were harsh winters that tested their endurance, dry summers that threatened their water supply, and the ever-present financial pressures of running a ranch. But there were also moments of pure joy. Robert's pride when he successfully trained his first horse under Ryder's guidance, Elizabeth's delight when she learned to read and discovered the magic of books, Theodore's laughter as he chased chickens around the yard. Deanna and Ryder's love for each other only deepened with time. They had built a true partnership, supporting each other through difficulties and celebrating each other's successes. Ryder never tried to limit Deanna's ambitions or force her into a traditional role, and Deanna respected Ryder's knowledge and experience while also contributing her own ideas and skills to their ranch's success. On their 20th wedding anniversary, Ryder surprised Deanna by taking her back to North Platte for the harvest dance. They had not attended since the night they met, both too busy with the demands of ranch life and raising children to spare the time for such frivolities. But Ryder had arranged for friends to watch the children, and he had insisted that Deanna pack her finest dress. When they arrived at the town hall, now modernized with electric lights, Deanna felt a wave of nostalgia. She could still remember standing in this very spot, watching a dusty cowboy walk toward her and ask for a dance that would change her life. "May I have this dance?" Ryder asked, echoing the words he had spoken 2 decades earlier. "Always," Deanna replied, taking his hand. They danced as they had that first night, but this time there was no uncertainty, no questions about what the future might hold. They knew each other completely now, had weathered storms and celebrated triumphs together, had built a life and a family and a home. And the love Deanna saw in Ryder's eyes was even deeper than it had been that first night. enriched by years of partnership and devotion. "You ever regret it?" Deanna asked as they moved across the floor. "Marrying me, taking on the burden of my ambitions and ideas." Ryder pulled her closer, his hand warm on her waist. "Not for a single second. You are the best decision I ever made, Deanna Lawson. You made me better than I ever could have been alone. You gave me a family, a purpose, and a love I never knew existed. I would choose you again and again in every lifetime." Deanna felt tears prick her eyes. "I love you," she said simply, "more now than even on the day we married." "And I love you," Ryder replied, "more than I have words to express." They continued to dance, surrounded by music and light and the chatter of the town, but aware only of each other. It was perfect, just as that first dance had been perfect, and Deanna knew with absolute certainty that refusing every other suitor had been exactly the right choice. She had been waiting, though she had not known it, for a dusty cowboy who would see her not as a prize or a possession, but as a partner, an equal, a beloved companion for life's journey. The years ahead would bring more changes, of course. Robert would grow up to take over the horse training operation, expanding it beyond even Ryder's dreams. Elizabeth would become a teacher herself, eventually taking over Diana's school and modernizing it with new teaching methods. Theodore would discover a gift for business and help the ranch navigate the changing economy of the new century. Diana and Ryder would grow old together, their hands becoming gnarled and their hair turning white, but their love never diminishing. They would sit together on the porch of their ranch house, watching the sun set over the prairie, and remember that autumn night when a simple request for a dance had set everything in motion. When Ryder passed away at the age of 78, surrounded by his family, his last words were for Deanna. "Thank you," he whispered, his hand clasped in hers. "Thank you for dancing with me that night. Thank you for choosing me. Thank you for the life we built together." Deanna lived for another 5 years, dying peacefully in her sleep at the age of 81. Her children found her with a smile on her face, and on her bedside table was a worn photograph from their wedding day, Ryder looking at Deanna as if she were the most precious thing in the world. They were buried side by side on a hill overlooking their ranch, the land they had built together through hard work and love. Their headstones bore simple inscriptions, but their true memorial was the family they had created, the ranch that still bore their name, and the school that continued to educate children using the principles Diana had established. And sometimes, on warm autumn evenings, the ranch hands swore they could see 2 figures dancing on the hill where Diana and Ryder rested, moving together in perfect harmony just as they had on that long-ago night when a dusty cowboy had asked the judge's niece for one dance, and she had said yes, changing both their lives forever. The legacy of Diana and Ryder Lawson lived on through their children, grandchildren, and great-grandchildren. The ranch continued to thrive, adapting to changing times while maintaining the values its founders had established: hard work, integrity, and respect for both people and animals. The school Diana had started eventually became part of the public education system, but it retained its emphasis on critical thinking and practical knowledge, a testament to Diana's vision. Robert, who had inherited his father's gift with horses and his mother's business acumen, married a schoolteacher from Omaha and had 4 children of his own. He never forgot the lessons his parents had taught him about partnership and respect in marriage, and he passed those values on to his own children. Elizabeth became one of the most respected educators in the territory, eventually authoring a book on progressive teaching methods that was used in schools throughout the West. She married late, at 32, choosing a quiet lawyer who supported her career and shared her passion for education. They had two daughters who both became teachers themselves. Theodore, the baby of the family, inherited his mother's love of learning and his father's practical skills. He studied business in Omaha and returned to help the family ranch navigate the economic challenges of the early 20th century. His innovations in ranch management and marketing helped ensure the Lawson Ranch remained profitable even during difficult times. He married his childhood sweetheart, and they had 5 children who all played active roles in the ranch's operation. The story of how Diana and Ryder met became family legend, told and retold to each new generation. The tale of the judge's niece who refused every suitor until a dusty cowboy asked for one dance became a reminder that true love often comes in unexpected packages, and that the courage to choose one's own path, rather than following society's expectations, can lead to extraordinary happiness. The little house where Diana and Ryder had first lived was preserved by the family, maintained as a reminder of their humble beginnings. Grandchildren and great-grandchildren would visit it, marveling at the simple furnishings and small rooms, trying to imagine how their pioneering ancestors had built an empire from such modest origins. Diana's collection of books, carefully maintained over the years, became the foundation for a library established in her honor in North Platte. The Diana Lawson Memorial Library served the community for generations, providing access to knowledge and education, just as Diana had always believed everyone deserved. The photograph from their wedding day, the one found on Diana's bedside table, was eventually framed and hung in the ranch house's main room, a constant reminder to the family of where they came from and the love that had made everything possible. In the photograph, Ryder's expression as he looked at Diana told the whole story. The wonder, the devotion, the absolute certainty that he had found something rare and precious. On the anniversary of that first dance each year, the family would gather at the ranch for a celebration. There would be food and music and dancing, and always, someone would tell the story of how it all began. The children would listen with wide eyes. The teenagers would roll theirs but secretly found it romantic. And the adults would smile, remembering their own love stories and how Diana and Ryder's example had influenced their choices. The harvest dances in North Platte continued for many years, eventually becoming a town tradition that was part of the annual fair. And always, there would be someone who would point out the spot where Ryder Lawson had asked Diana Olsen to dance, where a love story that became legend had begun. Some said the town hall was blessed, that couples who met there were destined for happy marriages. Whether that was true or simply romantic fancy, many couples did meet at those dances over the years, and many of them would cite Diana and Ryder's story as inspiration for their own relationships. As the 20th century progressed, and the world changed in ways Diana and Ryder could never have imagined, their story remained constant, a reminder of simpler times and enduring values. Through world wars and economic depressions, through the transformation of the West from frontier to modern civilization, the story of their love endured. The ranch itself became a historical landmark in the 1950s, recognized for its role in the development of humane horse training methods and its early commitment to education in rural areas. Tourists would sometimes visit, hoping to see where the legendary Diana and Ryder Lawson had lived and worked. The family, while protective of their privacy, took pride in their ancestors' legacy and were willing to share the story with those who were genuinely interested. The values Diana and Ryder had embodied became part of the family's identity. Each generation was taught to value education, to respect women as equals, to treat animals with kindness, to work hard but also to prioritize family and relationships. These were not just abstract principles but practical guidelines that shaped how the Lawsons lived their lives. And on quiet evenings, when the wind whispered across the prairie and the stars shone brilliantly overhead, it was easy to imagine Deanna and Ryder still there, still together, still dancing. Their love story had ended, as all love stories must, with death and separation. But the impact of their lives together, the family and legacy they had created, continued on, a testament to the power of choosing love over convention, partnership over possession, and authenticity over expectation. The dusty cowboy who had walked into a harvest dance and asked for one dance had changed not just Diana's life, but the lives of everyone who came after them. And the judge's niece, who had refused every suitor until she found one who saw her, truly had proven that waiting for the right person, rather than settling for the convenient one, was always worth it. Their story was, in the end, both extraordinary and simple. Extraordinary because of the deep love and partnership they shared, the legacy they built, and the lives they touched. Simple because at its core, it was just about two people who found each other, chose each other, and built a life together based on mutual respect, shared values, and enduring love. And that, more than anything else, was what made their story worth remembering, worth telling to each new generation, worth preserving in photographs and memories and the land itself. Diana and Ryder Lawson had lived fully, loved deeply, and left the world better than they found it. What more could anyone ask of a life well lived? The ranch continued to operate for over 100 years after Diana and Ryder founded it, finally being donated to a historical trust in the early 21st century. It became a working museum, where visitors could learn about ranch life in the late 19th century, about the importance of education in frontier communities, and about a love story that had captured hearts for generations. School children on field trips would walk through the preserved house, see the books Diana had treasured, and learn about a woman who had insisted on using her mind as well as her hands, who had refused to be limited by society's expectations. They would visit the stables and learn about Ryder's revolutionary horse training methods, based on patience and understanding rather than force and fear. And they would hear the story of how it all began, with a dance and a choice and two people brave enough to build a life that honored both of them equally. In a world that often seemed to have forgotten such values, Diana and Ryder's story offered hope, a reminder that true partnership was possible, that love could be both romantic and practical, passionate and enduring. The legacy of that one dance, that one moment of courage when Diana said yes to a dusty cowboy instead of no as she had to so many others, rippled forward through time, touching lives in ways neither Diana nor Ryder could have imagined. Their great-great-grandchildren, living in a world of computers and cell phones and opportunities their ancestors could never have dreamed of, still carried forward the values Diana and Ryder had instilled. Integrity, hard work, respect for all people, and the courage to choose love over convention. And somewhere, in the collective memory of a family and a community, Diana and Ryder Lawson danced on, forever young, forever in love, forever proof that sometimes the most important decision you can make is to say yes when your heart tells you something is right, even if your head says it is impractical or too fast or too different from what everyone expects. They had lived, they had loved, and they had left a legacy that would endure for generations. And it all began with one dusty cowboy, one particular young woman, and one dance that changed everything.